we will continue our Jewish journey through the Gospel of Mark. Now, it's been several weeks since we've been in this passage. We are in chapter 7 of the Gospel of Mark. Let's do a very quick reiteration of where we have been previously in the Jewish journey through the Gospel of Mark. You remember we saw this passage about internal defilement. We had the previous passage where Yeshua is talking about, or the Pharisees are accusing his disciples of not washing their hands, and that leads into this discussion here about internal defilement. There's nothing outside the man which can defile him if it goes into him. The things which proceed out of him, that's what defiles the man. When he left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples questioned him about the parable. To which Yeshua may have said something like, parable, shmarable, what was hard to understand? I taught plain English or plain Hebrew, Aramaic. What was difficult to understand about this? This wasn't particularly complicated, but I will explain it to you. He said to them, are you so lacking in understanding also? Do you not understand? It's basic biology. Whatever goes into the man from outside cannot defile him, because it does not go into his heart, but into his stomach. It doesn't go into his emotional or volition, and the emotional or volitional or even intellectual compartments of the man. It doesn't go to the brain, it doesn't go to the heart. Doesn't even go into his liver, it goes into the stomach. Goes into his kishkish. And once it goes into the stomach, again, basic biology, it is eliminated. For those who can't handle the truth, this is an ancient bathroom. Yeshua is discussing bathroom elimination. Food waste. Pretty simple stuff. Thus he declared all foods clean. And he was saying that which proceeds out of the man. Now he's not talking about elimination. He is talking about what comes from the heart. That's the stuff that defiles a man. According to the prophets, Jeremiah specifically, the heart says more deceitful than all else, is desperately deceitful, desperately wicked. Who can understand it? Even good people sometimes express themselves in a defiling way. For from within, Yeshua continues, out of the heart of men proceed the evil thoughts, fornications, thefts, murders, adulteries. Keep that list. Evil thoughts, fornications, thefts, murders, adulteries. He's not talking about singular. He's talking in the plural. He's talking about a spectrum of activity in each one of these concepts. Each one of these concepts is pregnant with possibilities and potential for defilement as it proceeds from the heart of man, out the mouth. And deeds of hand, deeds of coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, murder, pride, foolishness. So we go from actions to attitudes. All these evil things proceed from within and defile a man. So we ended last time by asking, well, how many of that list apply to you? Any? Take your pick. Again, it's a broad panoply, a broad spectrum of potential defilement. You know, on Yom Kippur, we have the we have sinned prayer, and there's multiple sins that are recited in the congregation on Yom Kippur, David Tumen. Little something for everyone. Sins you may have committed, sins you may have thought of committing, sins you thought of committing but didn't get around to committing, sins you may not have heard of. We all confess them on Yom Kippur because the community takes responsibility for one another. And so, I hope you've thought through that a little bit regarding how many of those apply to you. But the solution, ultimately, is to allow ourselves freedom, the freedom that God allows, and not only for ourselves, but allowing others to enjoy the freedom that God allows. To limit someone else's freedom is a terrible thing to do. And when it comes to contamination, when it comes to cooties, when it comes to defilement, we're not contaminated by something because others say we're contaminated by it. We're contaminated by things that come out of our hearts. And that's what we should be focused on. We can only be contaminated. We can only be disinfected from the inside out. You must get to the very heart of the matter. Only dealing with externals does not solve the problem. It doesn't mean that externals are unimportant. But limiting yourself to externals, as the Pharisees did in this passage, it doesn't solve the problem, because the problem begins in the heart. So if that's the case, what is Yeshua calling us to now? What is the heart of the matter? What's he calling you to? Perhaps he's calling us to examine, to search out and weigh our own hearts. That's a good place to start, right? Alexander Pope, the unexamined life is not worth living. It's not to be confused with Pope Alexander. He's a different guy completely. But we must weigh our own hearts. Perhaps the challenge of chapter 7, this passage, is to ensure that nothing in our lives, even good things, distracts from or detracts from or supersedes, most assuredly, the Lord's expressed instructions. And moment by moment, hour by hour, day by day, our hearts are to be increasingly aligned with our Messiah in authentic, honest, focused, and dedicated surrender. Those characteristics that I pray for our children, those are chosen from biblical examples to specifically pray that our children will have their hearts aligned with our Messiah, authentically, honestly, with focus, and in dedicated surrender. Well, the passage continues, chapter 7. We move different location, but chronologically, this is where we are in the book of Mark, rather. Passage I call going to the dogs. Going to the dogs. Mark 7, 24 through 37. We're only going to get part of that way today. It tells us that Yeshua got up and went away from there to the region of Tyre, or here. Right? If you're feeling a little bit tired, you go down to Tyre. No. If you need tires, you go to Tyre. No. Tyre. What is Tyre? Tyre was an important city, not in Israel. Today it's in Lebanon, but it was at that time. It was part of Phoenicia. Phoenicia, the region of Phoenicia, which is Lebanon, right, just north of Israel, Judea and Galilee, and on top of that we have Phoenicia. And so he leaves. He's supposed to be going to the chosen people, right? He's supposed to be going to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He needs a break. We've seen over the past few chapters several attempts for Yeshua and his disciples to just literally always surrounded by people, always doing ministry, always surrounded by needs, just to get a break, just to get away. And so they go north to Tyre. He wanted to, look what it says. No one would know of it. He entered a house. He wanted to go and be incognito, which is a Hebrew word for meaning incognito, and decides that even there he discovers he could not escape notice. So if we look at the map, we see that here's Galilee, Sea of Galilee right here. Here's down here is where you arrive. Down below the map is where you arrive in your jet plane when you come with me to Israel in 2027. But if we go north, the Sea of Galilee, and out toward the sea, we see here we are in Phoenicia. The region of Tyre is up here. Sidon is just at the very tip top by that other river. So we're outside of the land of Israel. He goes into the house, and what does he discover? He discovers that he's been discovered. After hearing of him, a woman whose daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came and fell at his feet. You would think at some point, now I know Mark is the gospel of action, but at some point you realize, you would think, Yeshua, man, you're really having a difficult time escaping and getting away from it all. But nobody appears to allow this guy to even take a vacation, even a brief one, even outside of Israel. Even though he goes north of Israel, he cannot escape notice like a celebrity. He was forced to go outside the land of Israel for his own good. But I guess he wasn't wearing his foster grants, and he's recognized. And after hearing of him, this woman, what's the story? Where are we going to find a woman who's heard of Yeshua? How many Jewish women are up in Phoenicia? Wait a minute. She's up in Phoenicia. Maybe she's not Jewish. Huh. Well, let's see what I can tell about the woman here. What does Mark tell me here? She's got a daughter. So far, so good. But the daughter is possessed of an unclean spirit. And she's not Jewish. She knows a celebrity in her town. And she makes a beeline to find this guy. Not to ask for an autograph. Instead, she immediately came and gave proper response in light of who he is. What did she do? She fell at his feet. Her daughter needs an exorcism. Not an autograph, an exorcism. Now, in case people had questions, like I did just now, who is this woman and how does she know about Yeshua? Mark tells us. Now, this woman was a Gentile calls her of the Syrophoenician race. Syrophoenicia. Phoenicia, of course, is the country that's there. Just east to it is Syria, that entire region together, Syrophoenicia. Syrophoenicia, or Syrophoenicia, or Phoenicia. And so, here's a Gentile, but she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. She's a very specific Gentile. The people who live in the area, she is a native of the land, which raises the question, if she's not Jewish, which she's not, and she is a Gentile, why is she begging at this Jewish rabbi's feet? How does she know to do so, first of all? We've only seen one other person in Mark begging at his feet, and this was a Jewish leader in the synagogue. Remember Yair, Jairus, also had a daughter. Parents will beg if they can get their children help. But we have not seen other Jewish people do this. Only the one, but we see this Gentile woman down on her knees. What is she doing? What does she know? Obviously, his reputation precedes him. When you are a healer, par excellence, when you are an exorcist, par excellence, your reputation absolutely precedes you, even outside of the country. And she, as a Gentile, has heard this. She realizes she's got a problem. And she recognizes the guy, falls at his feet. And look at what the text is telling us. She didn't ask him once. She kept asking him. While she's down there at his feet, she continued to ask him continually. Grammatically, there's a durative property there. This is a continual, please help my daughter, please help my daughter. Asking and asking him, begging him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Now, from a cultural point of view, sociologically, it's no small thing for a Jewish man, let alone a rabbi, to speak with a woman. But it is a very large matzah ball for a Gentile woman to approach a Jewish man. We see something similar to this kind of conversation with the Samaritan woman in John chapter 4. But remember, Yeshua initiated that conversation. This is a rather unique situation for a Gentile woman to approach Yeshua, to initiate the conversation, especially down on her knees, begging and asking him to cast out the demon of her daughter. I wonder what happens. And he was saying to her, let the children be satisfied first. For it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. That's why I call the passage going to the dogs, by the way. And you know, many people read this statement from Yeshua. I said, Jesus, did you just call this Gentile woman a dog? Actually, he didn't single her out specifically as a dog, but he actually called all Gentiles dogs. But he calls them dogs as opposed to calling them children. It's not calling them and saying, you're a wild, mangy, or a bunch of wild, mangy cur. It's just the differentiation between a household pet and a child. Of course, Jewish people back then didn't, by and large, have household pets like dogs, but the Gentile region, and the Gentiles in the region certainly had a big habit of having pets like dogs. And when you read this passage the first time, it surely seems like it's very hard and harsh, ethnocentric, culturally superior, perhaps, as the young people would say, racist statement. Certainly not politically correct today. I could see if this happened, today, what the headlines would be on the internet. Well-known Jewish teacher calls Gentiles animals. Film at 11. It'd be worse on the internet today. But it's not an insult. It's not a put down. Really? What can you do to convince me that it's not an insult or a put down? Let's see first what he says and what precedes the statement, let the children be satisfied first. See, there's a priority of God's plan and program. And you know this, especially in this congregation. We've spoken of it many times. Or maybe you don't know. Maybe you're watching at home and you've never heard this, but there is a priority regarding Messiah, and it's expressed in Romans 1:16. Paul says, the gospel is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. It is to the Jew first with priority. It's a matter of priority. It's not exclusivity. It is also to the Gentile. But priority for the Jew, not exclusivity. Priority and also to the Gentile. Israel has always been God's priority. That does not make them more important than Gentiles. It doesn't mean they exclude Gentiles in God's heart. It simply means that God has a particular priority. And if we look at this passage and we see the two groups are reflected here in the term children and dogs. Children and dogs. And what's the connection between children and dogs? Not in the dictionary, not out there in the world, but within the context of what Yeshua is saying. Because with great power comes what? Great responsibility. What Yeshua is saying is that he has the responsibility. He has the great power, absolutely. And he has the great responsibility of coming to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And what he's saying to her is, that's my job now, not to minister to Gentiles. The Messiah has come for Israel, as we know from reading the rest of Scripture. We went through the book of Acts together a couple of years ago. We saw together, as we went through, that for the first 7 years after Yeshua's resurrection and ascension, that they were continually and exclusively Jewish believers for the first 7 years. First Gentile comes into the church 7 years after the resurrection. And boy, oh boy, is that controversial. So controversial that the controversy is not settled for an additional decade until late 49, early 50, 10 years after the first Gentiles come to faith. But having said that, we have to be confident that God loves Jews and Gentiles, and there's no favoritism between the two. We're not talking about something culturally superior or culturally inferior, or ethnically superior, ethnically inferior. Yeshua is not saying Jews are a master race. Don't misunderstand the words of Yeshua. It's just that in God's priority, blessing is to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Converse of this is that it's also equally true that judgment is to the Jew first and also to the Greek. The Jews are first in God's priority for blessing, but they're also first in God's priority when it comes to him dealing out his wrath. Because to he whom is given much, much is expected. Once again, great power, great responsibility. So that helps us to understand what Yeshua is saying and what he's leading off with. If we look at the structure of the sentence, grammatically in English, it is not reflecting what the Greek is actually saying. That word first, is front-loaded in his statement. And he was saying to her, not let the children be satisfied first. No, first, let the children be satisfied. So, in other words, they must be filled, they must be fed, and it is not good to do things out of order. It is not a good thing to take bread that is specifically meant to satisfy the children's hunger, to take that message. It's not good to take that power. It's not good to reveal the messianic authority that's meant for the Jewish people and share it at this time first with the Gentiles. It's not good to take children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Still, some people read this and say, that's kind of horrible. What a horrible thing for Jesus to have said. But what is her response? I'm offended. As a microaggression, macroaggression. How great is this woman's faith that she came forward with this next line in desperation. But she answered and said to him, yes, Lord, but even the dogs on the table feed on the children's crumbs. Now, don't read it in this way, as so often it's been taken. A woman who is desperate and offended and said, well, desperately, but even the dogs under the table feed on the children's crumbs. Just share a crumb with me. Please, sir. Well, I have some more. She's not Oliver. That's not the intention of the passage. I think what's happening here, Jesus is actually having a conversation with her. And it's a theological conversation, not an insult. Jesus is saying something, and I think in a way, there's a test here. I think Jesus is saying what he says here so to not cast his pearl before swine, but to make sure that this woman actually understands who he is, and what he really can do for her. God speaks to all of us. And sometimes he puts challenges before us. And sometimes God gives us He gives us a whole slew of no's. No, 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 prior to giving us a single yes. That's been my experience. Sometimes there's a whole lot of no's before a single yes comes from him. I think because the issue is he wants us to know how much faith, he wants to know how much faith we have. And how badly do you want this? When I was a kid, just to give you a little indication, the kind of kid I was, maybe 6, 7 years old, 7, I think. I remember watching New Year's Eve. This is before New Year's Rockin' Eve. This is back in the Guy Lombardo days. How many of you remember that? I remember watching with my parents. I remember watching Guy Lombardo and his band enjoying the bubbles, the champagne. But I remember as the band played through the night, sitting there next to my parents on the couch, I was on the edge, and the arm of the couch for me became a piano. And I was so entertained that I wanted to be part of that. And so I made that couch arm a piano to play along with Guy Lombardo. And that was the beginning of asking my parents at that point, I'd like a piano. But, 7-year-old boys, they like a lot of things, and they change their minds very easily, right? But I really wanted to learn to play the piano. Whether or not I eventually succeeded is a matter of opinion. But I don't remember how many times my parents said no to me, or how many times I had to ask over and over again to have a piano, to have piano lessons. May I have them, please? Before they finally said yes to me, it was expressed to me, let's see how badly you want it. Let's see if this is just a passing fancy or something you truly desire. Because at other times, I'd ask my parents for other things, like a horse. Yeah, which, would have been no small feat in Brooklyn, unless you were McLeod, that dates me. I asked them for tap lessons. Those obviously never happened. So my parents, for all those things that cost money, put up a series of obstacles, a series of no's before something, a commitment as expensive as a piano and lessons, were brought in. It's no small investment. And Jesus is no different in the sense that he's about to make no small investment in this woman's life. Before he says an immediate yes, of course, whatever you ask, I'm in ministry after all. He puts an obstacle before her. I think God does that with us sometimes. In the same way, he puts obstacles in front of us. If the going gets tough, will the tough get going, or will they quit? How persistent will you be? How long will you knock on the door of prayer if God doesn't just hand you everything you want when you want it? Surely, Jesus seeing this, and her name is not Shirley, but Jesus seeing this Gentile, non-Jewish woman at his feet with this desperate need, did not casually dismiss her with an offhanded, it's not good to take children's bread and throw it to the dogs. In other words, find yourself a Gentile Messiah. You get the wrong guy. I'm a Jewish Messiah. No, I think Jesus is throwing down a gauntlet. down at his feet. So I'm going to throw a gauntlet down, to which the Syrian Phoenician woman says, okay, touche. She answered and said, I see your illustration. Yes, Lord, children, first priority. I'm with you. But you know, even the dogs under the table feed on the children's crumbs. What do you think of that? We're tracking together? And he said to her, because of this answer, go. The demon has gone out of your daughter. Woman has got a lot of gumption, guts, chutzpah, especially for a Goyish woman, Gentile woman, to initiate the conversation with a Jewish rabbi, to bow down before a Jewish rabbi and ask him for a miracle. That takes a lot of chutzpah. And then when the answer is not so fast, young missy, well, she gives him an answer back. Even Gentiles can experience the overflow of Jewish blessing. And, you know, Yeshua doesn't even have to go to her house. He doesn't have to lay hands on her daughter. Not because he doesn't want to enter a Gentile house. That's not the issue. It's because Yeshua has the power. He has the authority to answer her prayer right there. That cry of her heart was answered. He has seen a quantifiable amount of faith. And to see that quantifiable amount of faith was rare to see even among the children themselves in Israel. But wow, to see this in Phoenicia from a Gentile. And so he gives her exactly what she asked for. The demon has gone out of your daughter because of this answer. And sure enough, Mark tells us, going back to the home, she found the child lying on the bed, the demon having left. Now, Mark gives us this follow-up. Where did this follow-up come from? Right? This is, if she left Jesus and that's the end of that, how did Mark know what happened? The disciples or Yeshua had to have encountered this woman again. She went out of her way and came home and found her daughter. The disciples, Jesus would have never found out unless there was follow-up. It's not a single encounter. There's at least two encounters. The first encounter is an encounter of prayer, of great faith. And the second encounter is one of rejoicing, a happy reunion that Mark is just simply giving us highlights. And that is how the story ends. And he went out and came down to Sea of Galilee, to the region of the Decapolis. What happened there? What's the next component to build upon this story? I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave you in suspense. Because it's time for us to put our attention to the cup and to the bread. Let's bring out the cup and the bread, please. If we could. Who's sharing? You do? Okay, thank you, Don. Please bring it out and distribute it. Now, some of us here today are Gentiles, some of us are Jewish. And as I've taken pains to emphasize, God loves both Jews and Gentiles. He's called you both, whether you're Jewish or whether you're a Gentile. Go ahead and distribute them. I'm talking. You're not interfering with my talk. Not distracting anybody. And the reason that you're here is because, again, whether you're a Jewish or whether you're Gentile, non-Jewish, Yeshua has died for you. Why would he do that? Because he loves you. That is just how much he loves you. His Father loves you, sent his Son. The Son loves you enough to die for you, to obey his Father. And then on the third day, rose again. The great deliverance of Passover on the Exodus included not just Jewish people, remember, attached to the tribes of Israel were, we don't know how many, but a random assortment of Egyptians, a mixed multitude, those who saw the power of God, those who understood what God was doing through the Jewish people and said, this is the God of power. This is the one we must follow, and we must attach ourselves to the people he called by his name. And so when the Red Sea comes around, it's not just Jewish sandals that are trotting across the sea. It's not just Jewish rejoicing on the other side when the seas closed on the army of Pharaoh. From the very beginning of our story as a nation, there have been Jews and Gentiles together who have been united through common faith in the one true God. And so we carry on that tradition even more so, with punctuation and emphasis, exclamation point, and how, as we are Beth Shalom, the house of the Prince of Peace. And so we remember the sacrifice of our Messiah. We remember his love for us. We remember his ratification of the new covenant made with Jewish people, but that is broad enough to include non-Jews as well, together with Jewish people, in the enjoyment and the overflow of it. And we remember that it was ratified through his blood, and that a new institution, a new era in human history occurs because of the sacrifice of our Messiah. So let us partake together of the bread and of the cup, and remember who he is.